This is Tara Grimm reporting for the Real News Network in Annapolis, Maryland. Money. It drives the country's incarceration industrial complex. One of the biggest funders of it is money bail. Here in Maryland, there's been a movement to end it for poor defendants, a struggle to make bail a thing of the past for nonviolent, low-level offenders. But the state's well-financed bail bond industry is fighting back, and today both sides met in front of the Judiciary Rules Committee, a meeting that led to a decision that could have major implications. The measure that passed the Judiciary Rules Committee today recommended that judges consider a defendant's ability to pay before setting bail. And if they determine they can't, not to set bail at all. Advocates say it's an important first step towards reforming bail in a state that locks up thousands of people who are too poor to pay for it. In fact, a recent report by the Public Defender's Office reveals Maryland jails 17,000 people per year before trial, simply because they can't afford bail, a policy that costs taxpayers tens of millions of dollars and defendants lost wages and fees. The Real News spoke to advocates for the new policy, bail bondsmen, and victims' rights proponents to sort out the implications of this critical decision.
Tell us what happened in the room today. What was approved or not approved? What happened, basically?
Essentially what happened was the rule was amended, Rule 4-216, that controls pretrial detention, was amended today, and the scope of the amendment was really to encourage judges and commissioners to take into consideration the individualized circumstances of each defendant. And it also asks the judges to consider the affordability of bail for people. Currently, too many people are being held in jail, presumed to be innocent, but held because they can't afford to post the bail that's been set. This rule will help. And the way it will help, it will ask judges to consider whether or not bail is affordable and whether or not the person will either show up or be a risk to public safety.
Go ahead.
So it's not a huge change, but it moves the court and it moves the judicial process in a direction that's more fair.
Now, you released some research about pretrial and bail. What did it say, and what was important about it in terms of this discussion?
Well, the research looked at about 330,000 cases in the district court in 18 of the 24 jurisdictions, and it covered a 5-year period from 2011 to 2015. And in sum and substance, the report shows that too many people are being held on bail they can't afford. For example, there are over 17,000 individuals over that period of time that were held in jail on bail that's $5,000 or less. So what that means is that if those individuals had $500, 10% of $5,000, or even less than that, they would be free. And the other side of that coin is that folks that have money can pay their way out of jail. So it's a fairness issue.
Very disappointed in the decision and everything, and I'm also disappointed because they did not let any of us talk. The people that are actually out in the field, that actually see what goes on a day-to-day basis, they emphasize that it's an unfair burden on people in poverty and everything, but what they don't consider is that most of us, we finance for people that can't afford to pay outright for a bail bond. We charge as low as 1% down. Some companies take no money down, and we finance the rest interest-free, mind you. Interest-free, so these people can go out and then they can conduct their lives in an ordinary manner, and that's one of the things they don't consider. And also, what the committee used as an example is Washington, D.C. Oh, I'm sorry, but Washington, D.C.'s judicial system is a disaster. As far as I'm concerned, their crime there is rampant, and their system does not work as far as anything here in the state of Maryland. It just doesn't fit. You know, you have a smaller jurisdiction, everything that's under federal, and now they also cited about Illinois, how they don't have a bail bondsman in Illinois as well. But you have to realize in Illinois, 3,600 homicides alone this year, 3,600 people killed.
Well, how does your system, if your thing is to get people out, how does that prevent crime? Because you're making a link, you're saying, well, we let people out. How does that prevent crime? I'm not sure I understand.
Right now, there is no way to prevent crime. Okay, even if you implement this new system, there's still not a deterrent and everything. What you're going to have is you're going to have something similar to what Illinois have, where you're going to have a lot of people that are getting out and they go out here and they commit more crimes and they don't have the fear of bond and they don't have the bail bondsmen that have a vested interest in them. And now you have a police force that's overworked, underpaid, not to mention the fact that look at the political climate now and look at the recent riots that happened last year. Now you have police that are overexerted, they're underpaid, and they don't have the manpower. We bail bondsmen can get these fugitives back in a heartbeat. One of the things is to ensure the courts run well and make sure it functions normal, and that's what we do. That's what we're a part of.
Well, they did say that there were thousands of people who just can't afford bail. Do you think it's fair to give people bail who just can't afford to pay your fee or to pay the 1% or the 10%? What's the point of giving them bail if they can't afford it? It doesn't even help you, really.
Well, actually, they can afford it. Under the system that I was talking about, like say a poor individual gets charged with a $5,000 bond. What they can do is we offer the incentive of 1% down. 1% of $500 is $50. And also there are companies out here that charge $25 a week payments until the bond is paid off.
So you make money later on. They're still going to pay 10%. They just pay it later on. They don't have to pay it right up front, is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's really very little justification for a money bail system in which the bail bondsmen determine who gets out of jail and who remains. People, if you really want to use a money system, then you ask people to deposit the money in court, and then that money's returned to them when the case is over. The profiteering that goes on among a small but really powerful group that represents the insurance companies across the country is one that really has reached the point where we have to question their continued service.
When you say insurance companies, how are the insurance companies, the larger companies, if they are involved, how are they involved in this business?
Well, when you give a $1,000 fee to a bail bondsman, that fee is divided 60-40. So the bail bondsman keeps 40%, $400, and the remaining goes to the surety that actually protects the local bail bondsman, and they get the other $600. So insurance companies where you and I might pay our mortgage, monthly mortgages, or car insurance, many of the biggest ones are involved in the bail bond business.
So you mean like the Aetna or the big companies are involved in this business?
Oh yeah, you can look up and you'll find Hartford Casualty. You'll find a lot of the big ones, Allegheny, quite a few here in Maryland.
How profitable is this for them, do you think?
It's one of the great risk-free industries and businesses across the country. There's very, very little money that bondsmen ever have to pay the state, because even when someone doesn't come to court and the bond is forfeited, the bail bondsman will seek a judge who will remit the forfeited money back to the bail bondsman. So it's a paper transaction.
What are the burdens that bail imposes on people, and what kind of repercussions does it have for poor communities in terms of having to bear this burden of bail?
Sure, and what we see across the country where cash bail is used, and Maryland is no exception, is you have poor people who are sitting in jail for days, weeks, and months for relatively low-level offenses simply because they can't afford to pay. That has enormous repercussions on them and their families. We're talking about the losing jobs. We're talking about not ability to pay rent. We're talking about people losing their children to child welfare services, right? This is really ripping at the fabric of communities. And more than that, what we are now seeing, particularly in light of the report issued by the Public Defender's Office, is that there are very significant amounts of money, millions of dollars, that poor communities are paying to bail bondsman companies that are leaving those communities, that are never coming back into those communities. So this is a huge issue for poor communities, and it's a social justice issue for the state of Maryland.
So So victims really lost today. When defendants are not held accountable, victims are not able to move forward. They're not able to begin their healing process. They're not able to have their day in court. So whether the defendant has a lot of money or has no money, that doesn't apply when you're talking about sexual predators, when you're talking about child pornographers, human traffickers. These are people who are committing very real crimes in the state of Maryland with real victims who are just walking free because they don't have some accountability. We know that bail works. I'm not an expert in bail, but I've looked at enough studies that when a defendant is out on bail because they've had to pay some sort of money, because their family support, their network has had to buy into this, has had to help support the defendant, they are held accountable. They realize what they've done is serious, they realize it has serious consequences, and they show up for court. That allows victims to have their say at court and have their voice heard.
Well, it was my understanding that they were not supposed to, this is not supposed to apply to people who committed a dangerous crime like a sex crime. Are you worried that it will be overinterpreted? What's your concern in terms of as this finally works its way down through the judiciary?
So I'm really worried that while this isn't supposed to apply to violent sexual predators, we're already seeing that happening in the state of Maryland. Mm-hmm. In just the last couple of weeks, there have been more than one instance of alleged child pornographers out without bail.
Are these the child pornographers? Were they released because were they given no bail because they couldn't afford it, or was it because some other reason?
They were released on their own recognizance because they couldn't afford to pay the bail.
This is Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Annapolis, Maryland.